Judge set down her reading glasses and looked at my daughter across the courtroom. Miss Hargrove, she said, and I noticed the bailiff near the door shift his weight slightly, the way people do when they sense something is about to go wrong for someone. Is it your testimony that your father lacks the mental capacity to manage his own finances? My daughter's lawyer touched her arm. She ignored him. Your Honor, my father is 64 years old and recently recovered from a serious cardiac event. We believe he is making impulsive, emotionally driven decisions that are not in his long-term interest. The judge looked at me then. I held her gaze. Mr. Calloway, she said, would you like to respond to that characterization? I'd been waiting 3 months for this moment, ever since the morning I woke up in a hospital bed and found out my daughter and her husband had spent the previous week not at my bedside, but at a resort in the Bahamas I had paid for myself the previous Christmas. Your Honor, I said, I gave my daughter and her husband a house worth $410,000 as a wedding gift. I've been supplementing their income with $400 and $500 every month for 4 years. I paid for 2 international vacations, their cars, their furniture, and 6 months of private school deposits for a child they haven't had yet. When I had a heart attack in February, they were on that vacation. They knew I was in the hospital. They came home 9 days later. My request to be permitted to manage my own money, including the decision to stop sending $4,500 a month to 2 adults who are fully employed, is not impulsive. It is overdue. The courtroom was very quiet. The judge looked at my daughter's lawyer. He was already shuffling papers with the energy of a man preparing to lose gracefully. Her name was Beverly, my daughter. I'd named her myself, after my mother, who had worked as a school nurse for 31 years and never once asked anyone for a single thing she hadn't earned. My mother would have been horrified by this courtroom. Beverly was 41. Her husband, whose name was Craig, was 44. He sold commercial real estate and was, by most appearances, a competent adult. They had a 4-bedroom house in Alpharetta, Georgia, 2 cars, and a lifestyle that looked from the outside like success and was, from the inside, almost entirely funded by me. I hadn't understood that for a long time. Or maybe I had understood it and told myself a different story, that I was helping, that I was a good father, that the money was temporary, just until they got established, just until Craig's business picked up, just until Beverly finished her certification, just until. My cardiologist's name was Dr. Emmett Rowe, and he was the one who finally said to me, quietly, while I was still in the hospital with monitors on my chest and an IV in my arm, do you have people who will take care of you during recovery? Family? My daughter, I said. She'll be here soon. He nodded and wrote something in his chart. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The way he looked at the door, then back at me, then down at his chart, I understood something in that moment that I had been refusing to understand for years. Beverly came home from Nassau 9 days after my heart attack. She called from the airport. I remember the way her voice sounded. Not worried, exactly. More like inconvenienced. Daddy, we came back early. Clegg had to rearrange his whole schedule. I was sitting in a recliner in my living room with a home health aide named Doris, who charged $22 an hour and had been with me every day since I came home from the hospital. I had paid for Doris myself. I had arranged for Doris myself. I had called my attorney, Harold Vick, from my hospital bed and asked him to start drafting changes to my will and a formal cessation of the monthly transfers, also by myself, while Beverly was taking a catamaran tour. I'm glad you're home safe, I told her. She came over the next evening. Clegg stayed in the car. I noticed that from the window. She sat across from me in the living room and talked for 40 minutes about how difficult the travel had been, how they'd felt so terrible knowing I was here, how they'd tried to come back sooner but the flights were impossible. I listened. I'd gotten good at listening to Beverly over the years. It was a skill that required a certain deliberate blankness, like watching water run. When she finished, I told her I'd stop the automatic transfers. The blankness on her face lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then something shifted in her expression. Something I can only describe as a door closing. What do you mean, stop them? The $4,500 every month. I've cancelled the transfers. Daddy, you can't just. She stopped herself. Started again. You just had a heart attack. You're not in any condition to be making major financial decisions right now. I made this decision 3 weeks ago, I said. From the hospital, I was in excellent condition to make it. She left shortly after that. Craig never came inside. Over the next 6 weeks, I received 41 calls from Beverly and 17 from Craig. Some of them I answered. Most of them I didn't. The ones I answered followed a predictable pattern: initial softness, then pressure, then something that wasn't quite anger but was adjacent to it, then a retreat and a promise to call again soon. Harold called me in late April. They filed a petition, he said. Competency evaluation. They're claiming the cardiac event affected your judgment. I sat with that for a moment. My daughter had filed a legal document arguing that her father's heart attack had made him mentally unfit. Specifically, mentally unfit to stop giving her money. What do we need to do? I asked. I'll handle it, Harold said. But I want to be honest with you. It's going to be uncomfortable. Harold, I said, I've been uncomfortable for 4 years. I'm used to it. The competency evaluation was conducted by a neuropsychologist named Dr. Patricia Swin. She spent 3 hours with me on a Tuesday morning, asking me to recall sequences of numbers and identify patterns and explain my reasoning for various financial decisions. At the end, she handed me a card and said, somewhat dryly, "In my professional opinion, Mr. Calloway, you are functioning at a level that most 50-year-olds would envy." The report she submitted to the court said the same thing in more clinical language. Beverly and Craig's attorney had submitted a letter from a doctor whose name I didn't recognize, claiming I had shown signs of cognitive impairment consistent with post-cardiac recovery syndrome. Harold spent one afternoon making some phone calls and established that this doctor had met with Beverly and Craig twice and had never examined me in person. Not once. I want to tell you something about that moment. When Harold told me about that letter, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. Not anger, not vindication, something closer to grief, because that letter meant my daughter had sat down with a stranger and constructed a story about her father's mind being broken, not because it was true, but because it was useful. You can do a lot of things to someone who loves you. That particular thing is hard to come back from. The hearing was on a Thursday in June, in a courtroom in Fulton County that smelled like old carpet and recycled air. My neighbor Patrice drove me. She was 68, recently retired from teaching high school English for 30 years, and she had strong opinions about people who filed fraudulent medical documents to control their parents' money. She expressed these opinions in the car on the way there, and then settled into watchful silence in the gallery. Beverly sat at the petitioner's table, in a grey blazer I hadn't seen before. Craig sat beside her. He kept his eyes on the table mostly. I noticed that the judge's name was the Honorable Anita Marsh. She had the particular economy of expression that long-serving family court judges develop. She didn't perform neutrality. She simply had it, the way some people have good posture. You could tell she'd seen versions of this before. Beverly's attorney spoke first. He talked about my cardiac event, my age, the emotional nature of my decision to cease financial support, the stress I was under, my isolation. Harold objected twice. Both times, Judge Marsh sustained. Then Harold presented Dr. Swen's report, 4 years of bank records showing the transfers, the amounts, the consistency, my employment history. I'd run a landscaping and property maintenance company for 28 years before selling it at 62 for enough money to retire comfortably, which was where the $4,500 a month had been coming from. Not from some confused elderly man's dwindling savings, but from the deliberate, structured generosity of someone who had worked very hard and chosen to share that work's rewards with his family. Harold also submitted records from the hospital, showing the dates of my admission and the dates of Beverly and Craig's departure and return. Judge Marsh looked at those last documents for a long time. She called Beverly to speak directly. Beverly stood. She talked about wanting to protect me. She talked about love. She talked about the stress I was clearly under and how grief after a health crisis can affect a person's thinking in ways they're not aware of. Judge Marsh let her finish. Then she said, Ms. Hargrove, your father was hospitalized on February 11th. According to these records, you departed for the Bahamas on February 14th and returned on February 23rd. Is that accurate? Beverly glanced at her lawyer. We were already booked. I am asking if the dates are accurate. Yes, Your Honor. And your father arranged his own home health care during that time? He has a lot of support. Did you arrange it, or did he arrange it? A pause. He did. He arranged his own care, managed his own discharge, contacted his own attorney, made substantive changes to his financial planning, and is sitting here today in apparent full command of this proceeding. And your claim is that he lacks the capacity to decide how to allocate his own retirement funds. Beverly's lawyer started to rise. Judge Marsh looked at him. He sat back down. The ruling took about 4 minutes. Petition denied. Finding of full competency, order for Beverly and Craig to pay my legal costs within 90 days. Harrod's fees, which had come to just under $9,000. She also referred the fraudulent medical letter to the state licensing board. I hadn't expected that. Harold had. He looked satisfied in a way that was almost imperceptible unless you knew him. Patrice was waiting in the hallway. She handed me a coffee in a paper cup and said, Well, we won. Of course you did. She said it like it was the only possible outcome. In the parking garage, I could hear Beverly's voice echoing from somewhere on a lower level. High, sharp, the way it used to get when she was a teenager and things weren't going her way. I didn't go looking for the source of it. I got in Patrice's car and we drove to a diner on Peachtree and ate eggs and toast and talked about her garden for an hour. By the time I got home, I had 26 missed calls. 23 from Beverly, 3 from Craig. I listened to the first few voicemails. Beverly's voice went through a progression, controlled at the start, then pressured, then something that stopped being words. I want to repeat here. I saved them all to a folder on my computer. Harold had told me to save everything, and I had learned that Harold's advice was worth following. My granddaughter called that evening. Her name was Abby, and she was 13, and she was Beverly and Craig's daughter, which made her existence in my life one of the more complicated ongoing facts I dealt with. She called from her room, speaking quietly. Grandpa, are you okay? Mom is really upset. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you doing? Okay, I guess. There's been a lot of yelling. I'm sorry you're having to hear that. None of this is anything you need to worry about. Mom said you're trying to take the house back. I took a breath. I had not done that. I had no interest in doing that. The house was in their names. It had been a gift given freely. That's not true, I said. Your mom is going through some difficult feelings right now. Sometimes people say things that aren't accurate when they're upset. Are you going to stop coming to my school stuff? That landed somewhere specifically painful. Absolutely not. You tell me when things are happening, and I will be there. That has nothing to do with anything between me and your parents. She was quiet for a moment. Okay. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too. Go get some sleep. I sat for a while after that, in the same recliner where I'd been sitting when Doris was taking care of me, and Beverly called from the airport. The house was quiet. I could hear the refrigerator and somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog. I thought about Craig. He hadn't spoken a single word in the courtroom. Not to the judge, not to the lawyers, not to anyone. He'd sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes down. On the drive home from the Bahamas, whatever that drive looked like, I imagined he'd known. Some part of him must have known that they had crossed a line from which there was no clean return. 3 weeks later, Craig called me alone. Not from their joint line, from his cell. Mr. Calloway, he said. Craig. A long pause. I wanted to say. He stopped. Started again. I don't have any excuse for how we handled this. either the trip or the petition, or any of it. I knew it was wrong and I didn't stop it. I told myself Beverly knew what she was doing, and I didn't stop it. I didn't stop it. I didn't fill the silence for him. I'm not calling for money, he said. I know that's probably what you think. I'm not. Beverly and I are not in a good place right now. She's very angry with me for not supporting the petition more strongly, which is... I understand how that sounds. I needed you to know that I know we were wrong. It's a strange thing receiving an apology you didn't know you needed. I sat with his words for a moment. What are you going to do? I said. I don't know. Try to be better. Try to figure out what's real. I've been doing a lot of thinking since February. Since before February, honestly. He paused. Abby's been asking about you. I know. She called me. She adores you. Whatever happens with Beverly and me, I don't want Abby to lose you. She won't, I said. That's not in question. There was another long silence and then Craig said, thank you, in a way that had nothing to do with money. We hung up. I sat there and thought about what kind of man takes 12 years to figure out that his principles had been quietly suffocating under someone else's certainty, and whether that was something a person could actually come back from. Time, I supposed, would tell. The summer was quieter than I expected. Beverly didn't reach out directly for 2 months after the hearing. I heard things through Abby, fragments of financial stress, an argument about selling one of the cars, something about Beverly's workplace. Though I didn't press for details, I wasn't interested in their collapse as a spectacle. I'd never wanted that. I had wanted my $4,500 back every month and my dignity back and my life back, and I had all of those things now. Harold called in late July. The $9,000 in legal costs had been paid, right at the 90-day deadline. He sounded marginally surprised. Craig paid it, I said. It wasn't a question. The check came from his business account, Harold confirmed. I fired that away and didn't say anything more about it. In August, Abby asked if she could come stay for a week. Beverly allowed it, which I took as a sign of something. I didn't know exactly what, exhaustion maybe, or a grudging acknowledgement that punishing Abby to punish me served no one. Abby arrived on a Saturday morning with a backpack and a tote bag and opinions about every restaurant she passed on the drive over. She was 13 going on 40, with her mother's dark eyes and a quality of directness I preferred to think she got from me. We went to the farmer's market in the morning and to a movie in the afternoon and made dinner together, and she talked the entire time about school and her friends and the book she was reading and a teacher she couldn't stand. And I listened to every word and thought about how she had been the unrequested gift in the middle of all of this. The reason I couldn't simply close the door and walk away, even when walking away would have been so much easier. On the third evening, we were sitting on the back porch, watching the light go down, and she said, out of nowhere, Grandpa, do you think my mom is a bad person? I took my time with that. No, I said. I think your mom made some choices that hurt me, and I think she's going to have to live with knowing she made them. But she loves you and she has always loved you, and that's real. Are you ever going to talk to her again? I don't know. Maybe. When she's ready to have a real conversation, I'll be here. Abby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think she knows she messed up. She doesn't say it, but I can tell. You're a perceptive kid. I know. No false modesty. I loved that about her. I didn't hear from Beverly directly until September, 10 weeks after the hearing. She called on a Sunday afternoon, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Daddy. Her voice was different. The edge that had been there since February, the tightness, the performance, was gone. What was underneath it was something I hadn't heard in years. Just her, my daughter, before everything else got layered on top. Beverly. I'm not going to make excuses, she said. I know I have been every time I've called since February, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I need to say that I know. I know what we did. I know what the petition was. I know what the letter was. A pause. I'm ashamed of the letter. I sat down in the chair by the window. I've been in therapy since June, she continued. Craig and I are in couples counseling. I'm not saying any of that to get something from you. I'm saying it because you deserve to know that I'm trying to understand how I became someone who would do that. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle. I watched it move across the floor. Do you want to know what I think happened? I said, yes. I think you got so used to things being provided that you stopped being able to distinguish between generosity and entitlement. And I think I enabled that for a long time because saying yes was easier than saying no. That's on me as much as it's on you. Silence. I'm not ready to go back to the way things were, I said. And I won't go back to the money. That's done. I know. But I'm willing to try something different. If you want to try, I do. We talked for another 20 minutes. Real talking. Not the kind we'd been doing for years, where both of us were managing something. I was managing her feelings, she was managing my expectations. But actual talking. She told me things about the past 4 years that surprised me. Pressure she felt from Craig's family about their lifestyle, fear about being seen as lesser than her friends, a feeling that she had confused my love for her with the money I gave, and that when the money was there she felt loved. And she hadn't understood how sick that was until it was gone, and she had to sit in what was left. I didn't say everything that could have been said. Some of it didn't need to be said out loud. I just listened, and after a while, the talking wound down naturally, and there was a comfortable kind of quiet between us. Can we have dinner sometime? She said. You, me, Craig, Abby, somewhere neutral. Sure, I said. Let's do that. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe it would get there, maybe it wouldn't. But it was something real, something that hadn't been manufactured to get something from me. We met for dinner 3 weeks later at a place in Decatur that had good grilled salmon and a patio and didn't have the weight of family history in its walls. Abby sat next to me and ordered lemonade and carried most of the conversation, which was both appropriate and a relief. Craig was quieter than usual, but present, genuinely present, the way he hadn't been for years. Beverly looked tired, like someone who had been doing hard interior work, which apparently she had. After dinner in the parking lot, Beverly hugged me for the first time in a long time. A real hug, not the performance of one. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course, I meant it. On the drive home, I thought about the person I'd been before February, before the heart attack, before Doris and Harold and the courtroom and the 90-day clock, the person who wrote check after check and told himself it was love, when what it actually was avoidance. Avoidance of the hard conversation, avoidance of the difficult line, avoidance of the look on my daughter's face when I said no to something. I had spent a lot of energy avoiding that look, and in doing so, I had built a situation that nearly cost me everything. My neighbor Patrice had a saying she'd borrowed from somewhere, and she deployed it with the efficiency of someone who had figured out which wisdom was worth keeping. She said, some lessons you can read in a book, some you have to live through. I had lived through mine. The updates from Harold in the fall were uncomplicated. The licensing board had reviewed the fraudulent medical letter and issued a formal reprimand to the doctor who'd written it. He'd cooperated fully, apparently having realized fairly quickly that Beverly and Craig had used him, and that throwing himself on the board's mercy was his best option. Harold called it a satisfying outcome. In the measured way Harold expressed satisfaction, in October, I took Abby to a weekend farmer's market 2 towns over. She had recently decided she wanted to learn to cook and had identified several ingredients she needed for a recipe she'd found online. We spent a morning wandering between stalls, and she negotiated firmly with the vendor over heritage tomatoes and was given a small discount through apparent force of personality. I watched that and thought about my mother, the school nurse, who had also possessed the ability to get what she needed from a situation through plain-spoken directness. Some things do come around. That afternoon, sitting on a bench while Abby went back to look at something, I called my friend, Walt, who had known me since we were in our 30s, and ran a hardware store in the town where I'd grown up. We talked for a while about nothing important: football, the weather, his youngest who had just started college, and at some point he asked how things were going with Beverly. Better, I said. Really better, I think. Good. He didn't press. Walt knew when a thing was complicated and knew that complicated things didn't always need commentary. I think I spent a lot of years confusing taking care of someone with loving them, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, a lot of us do that. Abby came back carrying a small paper bag and looking satisfied. I put my phone away. Ready? She said. Ready. We drove home with the windows down and the radio on, and she sang along to a song I didn't know, and I didn't ask her to explain it, and the afternoon held everything it needed to.